The stomach. The stomach is a J-shaped pouch that can hold 1.5 liters of food and has three main roles. One, partially digest food chemically, particularly proteins. The second is to physically digest food by churning and dissolving nutrients. And the third is to store food in preparation for further digestion and absorption into the body. The top of the stomach is closed off by a sphincter muscle. And the sphincter muscle is really just smooth muscle. It's called the esophageal or cardiac sphincter. And this is the one where if stomach acid, if you eat too much food and stomach acid is released and food makes its all the way to the top, that is the sphincter that if acid starts to splash past it, it will start to burn away your esophagus. The pH of your stomach is about 2. And so if it goes past the cardiac sphincter, then it'll start to burn the inside of, or at least irritates your esophagus, and that leads to heartburn. Heartburn usually happens when people are lying down, and that kind of puts pressure on the stomach and pushes acid out past the sphincter and into the esophagus. Kind of a fun fact is that the top of the stomach is called the fundus. And the fundus actually has pressure sensors that detect food up to the top. And so usually you say, oh man, I'm full. And that's because pressure sensors in the fundus are going off. Some people, if they have too much acid splash against the cardiac sphincter, then it can become damaged. Or if the sphincter fails to close, then they kind of have heartburn all the time. The inside of the stomach, it's got these ridges that increases surface area. They're called rugae. And basically this J-shaped pouch, it's got a physical squeezing motion literally called churning, and it helps to mechanically break down the food. Basically, the stomach has 3 really important substances that are secreted. And the first one is HCl, or hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid helps dissolve and break up substances. It helps to kill pathogens. Dissolve nutrients. And it helps to denature proteins. The stomach's main job in digestion is to break down protein. There really isn't a lot of carbohydrate or a lot of fats digestion that goes on here. The second secretion that comes out is mucus. I'm saying a lot. The mucus is there to protect the stomach from acid. And it's constantly being secreted and reformed. And so a lot of people, there's a disorder called an ulcer. And an ulcer is when the mucus lining becomes a little bit thin and acid starts to splash against the wall and starts to create kind of if it starts to bleed into the stomach itself, then it's called an ulcer. Research suggests, though, that that's not the only cause. Like, just having really high acidity in your stomach and low mucus secretion isn't enough for an ulcer to occur. An ulcer is occurred by a bacteria that actually lives, once the mucus lining wears away and the acid splashes against it, it makes conditions ripe for a bacteria called H. pylori bacteria. And bacteria are just like anything else. They metabolize, and so if they metabolize, they will create carbon dioxide. And so one of the ways that you test if you have an ulcer is they literally measure your burps. And if your burps have a high amount of CO2, then that means that there's a bacteria growing in your stomach, and you likely have an ulcer. So, fun fact. The third secretion is an enzyme called pepsinogen. Now, pepsinogen is an inactive form of an enzyme, inactive form of the pepsin enzyme. And if you were paying attention last week, enzymes are generally named after their substrates. And so you guessed it, pepsin, its substrate is peptide bonds. Substrate is peptide bonds. So proteins are made up of amino acids, and these amino acid monomers, they go on forever. And so the pepsin enzyme will come in and cut those bonds and basically turn a protein into basically smaller versions. So going from, basically the order is going from protein to polypeptides to peptides and then amino acids. So really, pepsin really helps to get us from protein to polypeptides and from polypeptides to peptides. When we say inactive form, the thing that activates pepsin as an enzyme is actually really low pH. If the acidity of your stomach is at 2, then pepsin is activated and it will do its job. However, it becomes temporarily denatured if the pH changes. So if you were to drink a ton of milk in a very short amount of time, milk is quite basic, so it would take the pH of your stomach and it would raise it, become more basic, and then pepsin would turn back into pepsinogen. And it wouldn't be able to digest the protein. And that's generally bad. I mean, it is an evolutionary response to expel or vomit up viral proteins or foreign proteins. So that's why when you Google the milk gallon challenge, that is why people have a difficulty drinking all that milk, because the protein just starts to build up in their stomach. Yeah. So long story short, the purpose of the stomach is to break down proteins. It's J-shaped. It will secrete HCl. It'll secrete mucus, which acts as it protects the epithelial cells or the skin cells of the stomach from the HCl. And the reason why we have HCl is to kill pathogens, dissolve nutrients, but it's also to activate an enzyme called pepsinogen, and its active form is called pepsin. Cheers.